Hello and welcome. I'm Kriti Mehta and you're watching the World Report now on NewsX World. We'll start as always with a check of the top headlines this hour. A Ukrainian delegation heads to the US for talks on security guarantees and a post-war recovery package. President Zelensky says Kyiv needs up to $800 billion and hopes to sign key documents at Davos. The White House announces a US-led Board of Peace to oversee temporary governance in Gaza as deadly violence continues despite a fragile ceasefire. The board includes Marco Rubio, Steve Witkoff, Tony Blair and Jared Kushner, with President Trump serving as the chair. Residents say Iran's deadly crackdown has largely quelled protests as state media reports more arrests. President Trump claims Iran halts planned executions, though Tehran makes no official confirmation. Reza Pahlavi calls on the world to help oust Iran's Islamic Republic and target Revolutionary Guard leaders. Iran's security forces appear to have suppressed the nationwide protests after more than 3,000 deaths, rights groups say. Syria's President Ahmed al-Shara formally recognizes Kurdish language rights and restores citizenship to all Kurdish Syrians. The decree follows deadly Aleppo clashes that killed 23 and displaced over 150,000 before Kurdish forces withdraw. Uganda's army denies claims that opposition leader Bobi Wine is abducted by military helicopter after the election. His party maintains he is forcibly removed from his home as authorities reject the allegations. Myanmar's military-backed USDP widens its lead after the second round of voting, official figures show. The party is set to win 182 of 330 seats as the election enters its final phase amid conflict. The U.S. Justice Department investigates Governor Tim Walz and Mayor Jacob Frey over alleged obstruction of ICE operations. The probe follows the fatal shooting of Rennie Good by an ICE agent, which triggered protests in Minneapolis. Right, we now start with news from Egypt, where President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi says that he values an offer by U.S. President Donald Trump to mediate a dispute over the Nile River between Egypt and Ethiopia. In a social media post, Sisi said that he addressed Trump's letter by affirming Egypt's position and concerns about the country's water security regarding Ethiopia's disputed Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam. Earlier, Trump said that he was ready to restart U.S. mediation between Egypt and Ethiopia to resolve the dispute over the Ethiopian dam, which both Egypt and Sudan consider as a serious threat to vital water supplies. The dispute is rooted in Ethiopia's plan of a $5 billion dam project on a tributary of the Nile as central to its economic ambitions, which Egypt is opposed to. Joining me in this discussion is Professor A.K. Pasha, who's director at the Gulf Studies program in JNU, and he joins us from New Delhi. Thank you very much, Professor, for joining me in this discussion. First of all, I'd request you to take our international viewers through what the case and its contentions really are about. How does it affect Egypt, and what really is it that Ethiopia is saying?
Thank you. You see, the Nile River, which is the largest and longest river flowing from south to north from Lake Victoria through Uganda, South Sudan, and through Egypt and the Mediterranean Sea. You know, it has two branches, White Nile, which joins from Ethiopia in the Sudanese capital, Khartoum. This has been the lifeline of Sudan and Egypt for centuries. The pharaohs have ruled not only present-day Egypt but many parts of Sudan and southern Sudan also. So Ethiopia, which is landlocked and faces periodic droughts and famines, decided to sometime back decided to build a dam.
All right, we're encountering some network connection issues with our guest there, so we'll try to fix that. But as of now, viewers, in a social media post, CC said that he addressed Trump's letter by affirming Egypt's position and concerns about the country's water security regarding Ethiopia's disputed Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam. The two countries now embroiled over this project in a dispute. All right, I'm told Professor Pasha has joined me back. Professor, please do go on. We had some audio issues with you earlier.
Yeah, you see, Ethiopia decided to build this Renaissance dam to store water for agriculture and also for electricity purposes, which brought criticism from both Sudan and Egypt, and international mediation, and it matter went to many forums, United Nations, and so on and so forth. But Ethiopia was determined to build this dam for its larger economic development. Talks have been held continuously, but no progress has been made to address the concerns of Egypt and perhaps Sudan also. Now President Trump is offering to mediate because Egypt is a close ally of the United States, and it has cooperated with Israel and on the Gaza conflict recently. So Egypt is in the good books, whereas Ethiopia has problematic relations because of its BRICS membership and closer relations with China, Russia, and other countries. So in that way, Trump's attempt to mediate is, for his own conflict mediation efforts, which he claims to have achieved in at least 8 hotspots of the world. But it is not so easy as President Trump thinks, because there is this basic problem of fixing of the water resources to be shared between Egypt, Sudan, South Sudan, and Ethiopia.
Yeah.
And Ethiopia is deficient in rainfall, and it wants to store as much as possible for its needs.
Professor, now while Egypt has signaled its willingness to have Trump as a mediator, do you think Ethiopia will also give its assent, because it has long valued its own sovereignty and has not really signaled any intention to have a third-party mediator?
You see, the fear of Ethiopia is that since Egypt is close to the United States, Addis Ababa fears that it will be under pressure to accept the Egyptian demands favorably, which would affect the functioning of the Renaissance Dam and its larger demands on the Nile River, whose total capacity is shrinking because of various climatic change and other conditions. So the Ethiopians are not very keen because they know the demands of Egypt and how these would pan out in meeting. So that's how they are trying to dodge this meeting and any eventual pressure on their government to cede to the demands of Egypt.
Professor, also, how do you think the committee that will be established will be able to address these gaps in data sharing and help resolve the issue of flood management?
Yes, you see, flood management is very important because if there is excess rainfall, Ethiopia would release enormous quantities of water, which would flood not only southern Sudan but also Sudan and Egypt, because Egypt also has an Aswan Dam on the Nile near the border with Sudan, near Luxor, Aswan. So the dam would be overwhelmed. but the real issue is during summer and during lean season, when Egypt and Sudan would be needing water which Ethiopia would be unable to share like they used to get for centuries through free flow of Nile water. So now they have to agree on quota system which Egypt is insisting should have like what it used to have earlier, because you see, the Egyptians are totally dependent on water, irrigation and various other industrial purposes for Nile. They don't have any other access. So Egypt's future, whose population is rising over 100 million now, so they want guarantees that in future, if there is any shortage, Ethiopia will be able to release water, and they want to use the good offices of the United States now that they have close relations and they are cooperating on a variety of issues with Israel and the United States. But Ethiopia is dragging its own feet because Israel is also in contact with Ethiopia, and it is using its influence to prevent Egypt getting a larger share of the water. So this dynamics of regional competition, rivalry between Egypt, Israel, Ethiopia, and southern Sudan is leading to this friction and lack of coordination on the water resources, which if managed properly would be useful for all the 3-4 countries in the Nile basin.
All right. Finally, Professor, do you think the time is right for diplomacy? Because we've seen both countries posture a defensive position, whether it's the naval drills or this dam project itself.
Yes. You see, this has been dragging on for quite some time, and all diplomatic negotiations and interventions by outside parties have not fructified. So in that way, Ethiopia also needs financial assistance, investments, and a sort of stability on this issue, because it has bedeviled its relations with many countries, not just Egypt and southern Sudan, but also with neighboring countries and with the great powers. And this would help them to avoid any further sanctions or any military intervention, because Egypt has threatened to use force also to get its share of the water supply, because this may escalate now that Somaliland also has been recognized by Israel.
Yeah.
So Israel is a major party in this entire East African conflict zone, which Egypt wants to avoid.
All right, sure. Professor, thanks very much for your comments in this discussion, but stay on with us. Viewers, Syrians are now celebrating as the Syrian army moves into an area east of Aleppo after Kurdish forces agreed to withdraw. Syria's army says that it has taken control of vast swaths of the region east of Aleppo a day after President Ahmed al-Shara issued a decree declaring Kurdish a national language and granting the minority official recognition in an apparent goodwill gesture, though the Kurds said it fell short of their aspirations. This comes following a week of intense urban combat that killed at least 23 people and displaced over 140,000 Kurdish forces withdraw from their long-held enclaves in Sheikh Maqsood and Ashrafiyeh. I request Professor Pasha to join me back in the discussion. He is Director of the Gulf Studies Program at JNU. Professor Pasha, do you think these celebrations will last for a longer time, or is it likely for an escalation between the two sides, the Syrian army and the Kurdish forces, to resurface?
I think these celebrations are too early, and they may not last long, because you see, there is basic conflict between the Syrian government and the SDF, Syrian Democratic Forces, because an internationally agreed pact between the two parties and a ceasefire was announced last March, according to which the SDF forces should have been integrated with the Syrian army and all the forces into administration, like what happened in between South Yemen and Oman with the Popular Front for the Liberation of Oman and Arabian Gulf. That is the only liberation organization which is part of the state now. Likewise, this was earmarked between SDF, which has been fighting. SDF is composed of Syrian Kurds and Arabs and Turkomans and various other minority groups. The Americans have supported this, but the Turks have opposed it. So Aleppo and surrounding areas were under their control, but the Syrian government is under pressure from people there, the Arabs mostly, the Arabs to throw the Kurdish control out of this. So they have declared west of Euphrates as a no-go zone, etc. But on the eastern side, Aleppo and several other villages have been liberated from the SDF control, and it has weakened. And also because of the proximity of the PKK, which is banned by Turkey, and the Turkish government is fighting. So all of this have complicated this situation there, but the Syrian army appears to be determined to expel the SDF, despite the agreement which SDF accuses the government of not honoring and killing SDF forces. So this instability will continue for the foreseeable future until unless there is this agreement which was arrived at, implemented in good faith.
How much do you think, Professor Pasha, this had to do with US envoys meeting with the Kurdish forces?
You see, the Syrian Kurdish forces, SDF, has been taken care of by the United States because in the east, near Deir Zor and near the Iraqi border, the Americans are there controlling the oil and gas field from which these hydrocarbons are taken out through Turkey and exported to Israel and other countries. So there is also this in between Aleppo and this American controlled gas and oil fields. This Islamic State also is re-emerging, and it had to be bombed by Britain and the United States, and Turkey also periodically intervenes in this. So this is a very volatile area. It's a desert mostly, and lawlessness and tribes and smuggling of weapons. The Iranians are also active in that field. The remnants of their friends who were supporters of the Bashar al-Assad government, and the forces of Bashar al-Assad are still active. So a combination of Kurdish aspirations, the Arab desire to be independent there, and the other minorities, and the Islamic State, and American determination to stay put there for oil and gas. This has created a very explosive situation, and I don't think either the United States or Turkey or even the Syrian army has an answer to this, because today the Syrian army might have expanded its control, but if the SDF reorganizes and if they get reinforcements, they would again confront the the Syrian army, and there will be turmoil and unending bloodshed and skirmishes. So the basic need is to integrate the already promised SDF into the Syrian army, right, which President al-Shara is reluctant, because that would mean sharing power with the Kurdish groups, and eventually they may demand autonomy, although to neutralize this offensive by the Syrian army, he has granted citizenship to the Kurdish people who were stripped, many of them in 1962, and recognized Kurdish language as a national language, and right, Nowroz festival, which is celebrated by the Kurds in early summer as a national festival.
All right. Thanks very much, Professor Pasha, for joining us in this discussion. Moving ahead, viewers, let's now cover some news on Russia. President Vladimir Putin has said that Russia stands in solidarity with Cuba, which is determined to defend its sovereignty by any means. Putin stated that he would like to point out that Russia and the Republic of Cuba share truly strong and friendly relations. He added that Russia always provides assistance and support to their Cuban friends, and Russia stands in solidarity with Cuba amid their determined effort to defend their sovereignty and independence. However, Putin has stressed that the Russian-Cuban alliance has stood the test of time, as it is based on the two countries' people's sincere mutual sympathy. He added that Russia and Cuba will work together to implement energy, steel, transport and medicine projects that are vital for the Cuban economy, as well as to expand cultural and humanitarian exchanges. I have Andrew Latham, who's an international affairs expert, joining me in this discussion from Minneapolis. Andrew, thanks very much for joining us. Firstly, what do you think is the response that's going to come from Trump? Will he allow for Russian assistance to continue to Cuba at this point in time?
The short answer is no. Time frame to be determined, but it's clear that Donald Trump's vision of American security interests can be boiled down to the Monroe Doctrine with the Trump corollary, which is to say that no external, extra-hemispheric powers should have a foothold, economic, military, political, diplomatic, in the Western Hemisphere. Venezuela was the beginning of the implementation of that strategy, and we will see Russian influence in Venezuela diminished to practically zero in the near future. And that has two knock-on effects for Cuba, one of which is Cuba is very dependent on cheap Venezuelan oil, which it's not going to get anymore. And secondly, it is the last remaining bastion of Russian great power influence in the Western Hemisphere. It's a very brittle society. It's been economically and politically mismanaged for decades. It needs Russian support, economic and diplomatic, if not direct military support. And so you can see the incentive structure on the part of the Trump administration. This logically is the next domino to fall. Well, maybe after Greenland, I'm not sure, but you can see the logic at play, and you can see how Cuba is in the crosshairs. And one can understand why a diminished and failing great power like Russia has a vested interest in trying to maintain its great power status, at least in terms of the optics, by maintaining a presence in Cuba, with which it and its predecessor, the Soviet Union, has had a very, very long-term relationship.
All right, so Andrew, thanks for your assessment of the situation. Do stay on with me. Viewers, as we proceed, let's track some news from the US now, where as per reports, the Justice Department is investigating Minnesota officials, including Governor Tim Walz and Minneapolis Mayor Jacob Frey, over an alleged conspiracy to impede federal immigration agents. An extraordinary escalation in the Trump administration's clash with Democratic leaders there. Reports also suggest that subpoenas are likely to be issued in the probe. Nearly 3,000 federal immigration agents have been dispatched to Minneapolis with the stated objective of arresting people suspected of being in the US illegally and probing allegations of fraud in Minnesota. Meanwhile, the Department of Homeland Security has called the massive deployment the largest operation in its history. The large-scale presence of federal agents has triggered widespread local backlash, sparking protests and clashes, especially after the killing of Minnesota resident Rennie Nicole Good by an ICE officer. Walz and Frey, both Democrats, have vocally denounced the federal deployment to the Twin Cities, accusing federal agents of creating chaos and undermining public safety through aggressive tactics. Let's listen in to what Walz said.
Minnesotans have made it clear time and again they expect transparency through this process where a police officer uses deadly force. I don't have a predetermined notion. Yes, I saw the video. Yes, I saw that. But a thorough investigation will see what happened before that. It will take all factors in, and it will come up with a fair and just conclusion. And we will accept that. Very, very difficult for Minnesotans to think in any way this is going to be fair.
All right, I request Andrew to join me back in the discussion here. Andrew, what does this really speak about the federal-state relation in the US going ahead under Trump?
Well, it's not uncommon for the federal and state authorities to be at loggerheads. And it's not perhaps terribly surprising that Governor Walz and Mayor Fry have both sided with their base in the state of Minnesota, in the city of Minneapolis, which is very much opposed to these ICE operations. It's very much a grassroots opposition, and it's very deep and wide. It's no surprise that they would side with that constituency. But there's a question when advocacy sort of slips into impeding federal law enforcement. And that's what the Justice Department is going to be looking into. Are the comments and actions of Mayor Fry and Governor Walz, did they cross that line? And did they become agents working to impede federal law enforcement, not merely advocate for the residents of their state and their city? And that's something, to use Governor Walz's own words of a moment ago, accountability is at play here and at issue here. And we don't know exactly how this will turn out. The Department of Justice will conduct an investigation. It has written up subpoenas. It may deliver them and issue them. And that's all, at one level, just about normal state-federal government relations. But the concern is that the Trump administration has weaponized that normal way of doing business between the federal government and state governments. And it's weaponized it for partisan political reasons, and it's weaponized it in ways that are perhaps unprecedented. So this will unfold as it does, and we will get some clarity going forward. But for now, it's quite concerning in terms of American federalism.
All right, sure. As far as Walz and the mayor are concerned, what do you think is next?
Well, they're going to continue advocating for the various populations of undocumented migrants in the state and in Mayor Fry's city, Minneapolis. And the Trump administration is going to continue its pressure. It's going to probably have these subpoenas delivered, and it's going to conduct an investigation. And then it depends on what that investigation reveals. If it is the case that the line has been crossed, not advocacy, but impeding federal law enforcement, then it's going to go, probably it will have to go certainly up the federal court system, maybe even as far as the Supreme Court, to determine who's at fault. And then it's unclear what kind of, if the governor and the mayor are found, quote unquote, guilty in all of this, it remains to be seen what kind of penalties could be imposed. Because again, we're in the realm of federalism. Where does state prerogatives and rights begin and end, and when do federal government prerogatives and rights begin and end? There's a gray zone in between those two, and that's going to be where this battle is fought out.
All right, Andrew, then thanks very much for joining me in this discussion and helping us with your perspective. And as always, viewers, before we wrap up the bulletin, let's bring you some technology news. Now, sports organizations are being urged to manage digital safety as AI-generated misinformation, dubbed AI SLOP, continues to disrupt sports media. According to reports, fake content involving fabricated quotes and game updates is on the rise, leading to false accusations against athletes like Jason Kelsey and George Kittle. This surge in misinformation not only damages reputations but also distorts advertising metrics and creates potential risks in betting markets. The problem extends beyond the NFL to other major sports like the NBA and MLB, where fabricated scandals continue to target fans and distort public perception. And that's all we have time for. Thanks for watching NewsX World. For all international news and updates.